guys, it's Angelo, and today, with patch 8.1 on the horizon, we're having a look at the Shadow Priest changes planned for the upcoming content patch, how they will affect our gameplay, and what they mean going forward. Keep in mind that these changes are not final yet, and personally I do still expect things to change, and so should you, so take this with a small grain of salt. Good. That being said, if you want to discuss this topic after the video and would like to go into more detail outside of the comments, be sure to check out our Discord server with the link in the description and join the discussion. Now, of course, without any further ado, let's go right ahead and have a look. So, what exactly is changing for the Shadow Priest? Well, in order to identify the gravity of the upcoming changes, let's talk about the state of the Shadow Priest just quickly. Currently, the spec enjoys rather negative reputation, and no matter how much players love their spec, how skilled they are on it, or how much damage they can deal in ideal situations, this reputation does not come without good reason. The ramp-up time, in comparison to other classes, is still an issue, and on the contrary, your Voidforms, which again require you to ramp them up, don't last nearly long enough to justify the ramp-up, and you'll drop back out of them sooner than would be acceptable, at least in my opinion. On top of that, the 10% damage buff you gain via Voidform does not feel very rewarding or noticeable really, and the times where Voidform really changes the way the spec plays, feels, performs, and interacts during combat, those times have left us with the removal of our artifact weapons. But Blizzard seem to have heard the feedback. Let's take a look at the changes. Now, I will be taking these statements directly from the Blizzard Blue post, that way we are all on the exact same sheet of music, and of course I will link that in the description. Firstly, we will see a big change to Voidforms and how they play. Voidform now increases spell damage by 20%, up from previously 10. The Insanity Drain increase per second, so the amount of Insanity Drain that is added to your base Insanity Drain each second you are in Voidform is reduced by 15%, allowing for much longer Voidforms naturally. On top of that, Voidbolt's Insanity generation is increased by 25%, which means that you will generate 20 Insanity rather than 16. Also, Dispersion gets a buff. Its damage reduction is increased to 75% from previously 60, and it now increases our movement speed by 50%. There's also a new talent coming, called Intangibility. This talent replaces Mania and reduces Dispersion's cooldown by 25%, as well as causing you to be healed for 50% of your maximum health over Dispersion's duration. Up next, we have the 10% physical damage reduction from Shadow Form being completely removed. In its place, we now have Focused Will as a passive, which is the same passive ability that Disc and Holy share already, causing you to receive 15% reduced damage from melee abilities and attacks for 8 seconds whenever you are hit. Our PvP talent, Hallucinations, is also becoming a baseline passive, which allows our successful Dispel Magic, Mass Dispel, Purify Disease, Vampiric Embrace, and Power Word Shield casts to generate 6 Insanity. This is the same amount you would receive from 2 Mindflay clips or 1 global cooldown invested into Mindflay. I think this is a highly motivating change, as this allows us to use our utility spells a lot more in line with our gameplay, rather than penalizing us when using them. If any developer watches this video, in my opinion, this should also apply to our Silence, but only if Last Word, a talent which reduces the cooldown of Silence by 15 seconds, is not spec'd. Even though Silence is not on a global cooldown, you basically have to use Silence as a mouse over macro to use it to its full potential, otherwise you will very easily lose a global cooldown in its process. If, for example, an enemy behind you is beginning a cast, but you're on a target standing in front of you, you will have to actually click onto the target behind you and then silence it, and then perhaps switch back to the target in front of you, easily wasting 1, if not 2 global cooldowns in the hectic process. Currently, an easy way around this is to mouse over your silence, allowing you to skip the process of having to target an enemy, or rather the enemy you wish to silence. Other changes include Mind Bomb and Psychic Scream now taking 40% longer to break from damage, and Void Torrent generating 30 insanity over its duration and dealing 20% increased damage. On top of that, it no longer requires you to be in Voidform to cast it, so you can use it at any time. This is a pretty good change to the talent, but Mindbender will still be stronger in my opinion. While making this video, my Mindbender still generates 72 insanity during its duration overall, which is more than twice as much as Void Torrent does, and the 20% damage increase by itself will probably not make the talent over the top strong, but we will have to wait and see. Lingering Insanity now fades every 3 seconds instead of every 2 seconds, letting you keep your haste stacks for a lot longer, which will definitely be a great change. Surrender to Madness has its cooldown reduced by 33% and the penalty duration reduced by 50%. This means that you will only have 15 seconds where you cannot generate any insanity, rather than 30, which is pretty good, and its cooldown being reduced may possibly make this talent get a comeback again, and you all know that is something I've wished to see ever since its days of glory were over. Now, having addressed these changes, let's go ahead and discuss them. Firstly, I need to say that these changes are definitely good ones all across the board. The increase to Voidform uptime itself would have already been a big deal and would see a huge dynamic shift for the Shadow Priest, but the increased Void Bolt insanity generation, the 10% added damage to Voidform, and the insanity generation via different utility spells all make for a very potent range DPS spec to come. In practice, I think the only thing that will really feel noticeable will be the increase in Voidform uptime. Even though some boss fights make frequent use of things like Mass Dispel, think of Zul for example, we won't really notice the 6 insanity per global cooldown spent on a utility spell that much. However, on the contrary, it won't feel as frustrating when we do need to use a global cooldown for spells like these, and therefore not gaining any insanity during the cast of that set spell. What do you think? Personally, I think these changes will be huge for Shadow Priests and are definitely steps into the right direction when looking ahead. These changes will certainly make the gameplay much smoother and less punishing in many situations, but that being said, will also simplify a lot of situations and gameplay, as there is a lot more room for error now while still getting away with decent DPS. Again, I'd love to hear your opinion on this though. Do you think these changes are good? If so, why? Be sure to let me know, my friends, as all input is valuable. As always, special thanks to my supporters over at Patreon, and thank you very much to all of you for watching. Apologies for not posting videos as frequently as previously, but I promise I'll get back into the normal rhythm as quickly as possible. Now, as always, have a good one, my friends, and I will see you all in the next one.